December 20th, 1944. Ardennes Forest, just outside the village of Hossingen, Luxembourg. The snow is coming down in slow, lazy sheets, but nothing about this day feels gentle. Private First Class Eddie Walker, Company K, 2nd Battalion, 110th Infantry Regiment, 28th Infantry Division, stands over a row of battered gasoline stoves, his fingers numb inside thin wool gloves that were never meant for this kind of cold. A dented steel helmet sits low on his brow, steaming faintly where the melted snow meets warm metal. The air smells of burned coffee, scorched bacon grease, and cordite drifting in from the tree line. You're not looking at a rifleman, or an officer, or a tank commander. You're looking at a mess cook. Eddie's M1 carbine is propped within arm's reach against a snowbank. Magazine loaded, safety on. The sling is stiff with frozen mud. His apron, an old, grease-stained thing he kept from a stateside kitchen, is tied over his field jacket, an absurd splash of normal life in a world that has turned upside down. The world answers with a distant boom that rolls across the forest like thunder. German artillery, somewhere to the east. The ground trembles, just enough that the mess tins on the folding table rattle. Eddie pauses, ladle hovering over a dented pot of thin stew. "Christ, they're at it again," mutters Sergeant Donnelly, a thick-set supply NCO with a week's gray beard, stamping his boots near the stoves. His breath blooms in, quick clouds as he lights another cigarette with cupped, raw fingers. "Walker, you keep that coffee comin'. Those boys on the line are freezing their asses off." "Yes, Sergeant," Eddie replies automatically, though his eyes have already drifted past Donnelly, past the trucks half buried in snow, to the dark curtain of trees beyond. Somewhere in that forest, the front line is dissolving. Since the Germans smashed into the 28th Division sector 4 days ago, maps have started to mean less and less. Names like Clairvaux, Wiltz, and Hossingen, villages Eddie had never heard of before, keep getting shouted in the same breath as words like pulled back, cut off, and lost contact. The battalion CP has moved twice in 2 days. Radio messages sound more frantic, shorter, less certain, but Eddie is a cook. He hears things in fragments, carried back on the boots of men who plod out of the trees, faces hollowed by lack of sleep. They come to him for coffee, for stew, for anything hot that can convince their bodies to keep going. He ladles food into their mess kits and listens. Road east of town's gone. Kraut tanks. 3rd platoon's down to 9 men. We're supposed to bed. Hold. But nobody's sure where the hell the line is anymore. The words hover over the steaming pots, mixing with the vapor of boiling water and powdered coffee. Eddie says little. He just keeps serving, eyes flicking from man to man, piecing together a picture that no one else seems to have time to draw. Another salvo lands closer, much closer. The blast hits like a fist. Snow leaps up in a white sheet as earth and tree bark spray into the air. A fragment of hot steel sings past and bites into a nearby truck with a sharp, metallic scream. Someone shouts, someone else curses. The gasoline stoves dance on their stands. "Get down!" Donnelly yells, though the shells have already walked past, seeking some other patch of forest to crush. Eddie finds himself flat on the frozen ground, cheek pressed into icy slush, heart hammering. He tastes mud and copper. For a moment, his mind is back in Ohio, behind a diner stove, hollering orders over the lunchtime rush. The only explosions there were dropped plates. "Walker!" Donnelly's hand hauls him up by the collar. "You all right?" "Yeah." Eddie gasps. Though his hands won't stop shaking, Donnelly squints past him. Road that snakes back toward the rear. It's almost empty. Where there were trucks this morning, Lines of vehicles bringing ammo and bandages and rations. There is now only churned snow, and a single wrecked deuce and a half, with its hood up like a broken jaw. "Where the hell is everybody?" Donnelly mutters. As if in answer, a squad of infantry emerges from the trees. No formation, just men moving fast, hunched low, white snow capes flapping over their shoulders. Their faces are smeared with grime, helmets scuffed, uniforms torn. One of them, a lieutenant with a crooked pair of glasses and a Thompson slung over his chest, strides straight for the stoves. "Who's in charge here?" he barks. Donnelly straightens a bit. "Sergeant Donnelly, supply. Mess section." The lieutenant barely spares him a glance. His eyes flick to the stew, to the coffee, then back to the tree line. "Sergeant, listen carefully. The Krauts are behind us. Armor, infantry, probably more artillery than God. They've cut the road east, they've cut the road south, and I can't raise regiment on the radio. You understand what that means?" Donnelly swallows. "Means we're encircled." The lieutenant snaps. "Your trucks, your stoves, your supplies, plan on losing all of it. Get your people ready to move light. We might have one shot to punch west during the night." Might. The word hangs there. Encircled. Eddie feels it lodge in his chest like ice. He looks at the men around the stoves, the drivers, the clerks, the other cooks. None of them were meant to be in the front line. Most barely qualify on the rifle range. Yet, here they are, trapped in the same tightening noose as the infantry. "You!" The lieutenant's gaze lands on Eddie. "You're a runner?" Eddie blinks. "No, sir. I'm mess cook, sir." The lieutenant studies him for half a second, taking in the apron, the carbine, the mud-caked boots. Another artillery blast rumbles, farther off this time. Somewhere, a machine gun chatters, then falls silent. "Tonight," the lieutenant says, almost to himself, "somebody's going to have to get out of this mess and tell division what's happening here. Otherwise, they'll leave the whole regiment sitting in a pocket, and the Krauts will crush us by morning." He looks back at Eddie. "Cook or not, if you can move quiet, and you know these woods even a little, you might be more use than you think." Eddie feels every eye around the stoves turn toward him. The steam from the pots curls around their faces like ghostly hands. His heart hammers so loud he can barely hear the wind. He doesn't answer. Not yet. But the idea has already been planted. All too real. That tonight, in this frozen forest, the fate of an entire encircled regiment might depend on a mess cook slipping through the German lines in the dark. Snow settles over the ruined stoves as the lieutenant disappears back toward the trees, leaving Eddie staring at the drifting flakes like they might rearrange themselves into an answer. The day bleeds into night with no sunset, just a deepening blue that swallows the forest whole. Darkness comes early in December, and with it comes a silence that feels wrong, hollow, too complete. Everyone senses it. Even the wind seems to hold its breath. By 1900 hours, the mess area has been stripped to essentials. The gasoline stoves sit cold and abandoned. Crates of rations lie half buried in snow because no one has the strength to haul them out. The cooks and drivers cling to their rifles, trying not to stare at the empty road where a supply convoy should be, but isn't. Under a blackout tarp stretched between two trees, a dim, red-lensed flashlight clicks on. Lieutenant Marks, the man from earlier, kneels over a rough sketch drawn on the back of a K-ration carton. Half the ink has frozen, making the map look like a child's finger painting rather than military guidance. Donnelly, two infantry sergeants, and Eddie crouch around him. "All right," Marks whispers, tapping the carton. "We're here." The Germans have armor along this ridge, infantry here and here. We've got one narrow gap, maybe 200 yards, wide, where they're still shifting positions. That window will close before dawn. He taps again, harder this time. If someone can make it through, slip west, and get word to division, they can shift the artillery line. Maybe even punch a corridor back toward Clairvaux. Without that, they'll assume we're holding. And we'll be, well, we won't be. Eddie's stomach tightens. The lieutenant doesn't need to finish the sentence. The forest around them groans as trees shift under their weight of snow. Farther east, a motor purrs, the low, unmistakable rumble of a German SP gun or half-track, adjusting position. The men freeze. The engine revs once, then settles, muffled by distance. The lieutenant continues, voice even lower. Runners tried earlier. Nobody made it back. His gaze shifts to Eddie. But you worked the mess up here for days. You've been sending coffee up and down the Oss, CP trails. You know the deer tracks, the draw by the creek, all the ground. The line companies never bothered to scout. Eddie shakes his head before he realizes he's doing it. Sir, I'm not trained for this. I'm just a cook. Marks leans closer, his breath turning to frost between them. You're alive, Walker. That's your qualification. If a rifleman goes, the Germans expect him. They're watching for helmets and weapons and radio wires. But a cook? The lieutenant's eyes narrow. They'll overlook you before they understand what you are. Donnelly places a hand on Eddie's shoulder, heavy, solid. You don't owe us anything, kid, he murmurs. But if word doesn't get out, none of us are seeing sunrise. The tarp flutters with a sudden gust. Snow drifts inside, dancing in the red beam of the flashlight. The light snaps off. Darkness clamps down. They wait. 20, 30 seconds. Somewhere beyond the tree line, voices speak in sharp German. Boots crunch, a metallic clatter. Maybe a machine gun being repositioned. Maybe a panzer grenadier setting down his gear. Eddie feels sweat prick at the base of his neck, despite the cold. When the forest settles again, Marks leans forward. We move in two groups. Command and what's left of the line, companies try for the gap. If they draw fire, we scatter. In that chaos, Walker, you break west. Avoid the road, avoid lights, avoid open ground. Drop. If you hear German whispering, freeze. Eddie swallows. And if they see me? Donnelly answers before the lieutenant can. You run like hell. Eddie tries to breathe. The air feels too thick. He never asked for any of this. He enlisted to feed men, not rescue them, to boil coffee under canvas tents, not slip through enemy lines like some kind of ghost. But he sees the faces around him. Donnelly's cracked knuckles, Mark's trembling breath, the two infantry sergeants gripping their Thompsons like lifelines, and he realizes those faces depend on a cook with shaking hands and a too-loose carbine sling. All right, Eddie whispers. Marks nods and nudges the carton closer. With a gloved fingertip, he traces a path, through a ravine littered with blown tree trunks, across a frozen creek, then up a ridge scarred with shell holes. At the ridgeline, he circles a point. If you make it here, the krauts thin out. Past that, you turn west. Keep going until you hit friendly gunfire. Friendly gunfire. Eddie repeats softly. That's comforting. None of them smile. By 2200 hours, the regiment begins to move. Not in ranks or files, just shapes, slipping between trees, packs creaking, boots whispering through powdery snow. The moon hides behind a blanket of black clouds. Good. Darkness is Eddie's only ally. He shoulders his carbine, tightens the chin strap on his helmet, and tucks the map scrap into his jacket. Donnelly clasps his arm. "You come back, you hear? I got a whole pot of coffee waiting for you." Eddie tries to grin. "Make it two, Sarge." But as he steps into the forest's ink-black maw, following the faint tracks of Marks and the infantry, he realizes this is no heroic mission. He is alone. A cook in a war built for killers. And somewhere ahead, the German ring is closing. The forest swallows Eddie whole. Within 10 steps, the dim forms of the other men fade into black silhouettes, and then into nothing at all. The only sound is the brittle crunch of snow under his boots. Too loud, far too loud. So he slows, forcing each step to be careful, deliberate, patient. Darkness presses in from every direction, thick as wool. The cold gnaws at his fingertips, even through gloves. His breath forms pale ghosts that drift ahead of him, tiny betrayers illuminated by the faintest sliver of moon behind the clouds. He tucks his chin deeper into his collar and pushes forward. The trail drops into a ravine, just as the lieutenant's drawing predicted. Jagged stumps and uprooted trunks, torn apart by artillery strikes earlier in the day, lie scattered like broken teeth. Eddie slips between them, crouching low, one hand on the cold steel of the carbine for balance. Above him, the silhouettes of pines tremble in a faint wind. Somewhere close, far too close, a man coughs. Eddie freezes. 20 yards upslope, he sees movement. Dark shapes, hunched and slow. The guttural murmur of German voices drifts through the branches. A patrol. Eddie drops flat, belly to, the icy ground. Snow seeps through his jacket. His heartbeat thunders in his ears so loud he's terrified the Germans will hear it. He presses his face into the frozen earth, tasting dirt, tasting fear. Boots crunch down the slope. 6? 7 men? It's impossible to tell. Their conversation drifts in fragments, complaints about the cold, about rations, about some sergeant who stayed by the fire while they patrolled. They are close enough that Eddie can hear the scrape of a rifle sling against a coat button. He lies still. He doesn't breathe. One of the Germans stops. His boots pivot. For a moment, Eddie imagines the man staring straight into the trees, straight into him, as though the Aryan sense for prey can pierce the night. Seconds pass. The patrol moves on, their voices fading into the depth of the forest. Eddie stays down long after they've gone. 10 seconds, 20, maybe a full minute, until at last he lifts his head. His breath shakes on the exhale. He slithers lower into the ravine, keeping fallen trunks between himself and the direction the patrol wandered. Every muscle in his body is tight. He moves on hands and knees until he reaches the creek. Bed. It's frozen. A slick, glassy ribbon cutting through the woods. It reflects just enough moonlight to look like a trap, the brightest surface in the entire forest. Anyone stepping onto it would be silhouetted like a flare. Eddie isn't stepping onto it. He slips beneath the bank, following it like a ditch, keeping his head low. Roots hang down like skeletal fingers. His boots slide on the icy mud, but he grits his teeth and keeps moving, following the map Marks drew from memory. Across the creek, a sudden engine revs. Eddie flattens again, heart slamming. Ahead, the trees glow. Faintly, headlights filtered through branches. German armor, a half-track, maybe. Or worse, a panzer moving to tighten the noose around the American position. The engine idles, huffing like an animal in the shadows. Then voices rise, sharp, commanding. Not casual chatter, shouts. Eddie's blood runs cold. He edges forward just enough to peek between roots. German troops are setting up something, a barricade, a roadblock, maybe a machine gun nest. He can't tell, but whatever it is, it's right where the lieutenant said the gap would be. The gap is gone, or closing fast. A thin plume of warm air escapes Eddie's lips and crystallizes instantly. He has two choices: turn back and die with the rest, or go around the Germans deeper into terrain Marks hadn't mapped, terrain no one had scouted. He grips his carbine, fingers trembling. He chooses the unknown, sliding backward down the bank. He moves west but angles north, following instinct more than plan. The snow thickens as he climbs a ridge, each step sinking knee-deep. His breath burns in his chest. His legs ache. He slips on ice and slams shoulder first into a tree, stifling a cry. The darkness here feels different, emptier, untouched. The Germans are concentrated south and east. If he can swing wide, maybe, a flare bursts behind him, bright and violent, casting stark shadows across the forest. Eddie dives behind a boulder, snow exploding around him. The flare hisses as it floats down, burning, white. In its glow, he sees figures sprinting, spreading out, rifles at the ready. They're searching. They know someone slipped through. His throat tightens. This is it. This is where a cook dies in the snow, far from any kitchen, far from the safe smells of bacon and coffee. He digs his nails into the frozen earth and forces himself to crawl. Not run, not stand, crawl, westward, staying in the flare's shadow as it gutters out. Then he runs. Branches whip his face. Snow sprays behind him. His breath tears in ragged bursts. Behind him, a machine gun stutters, short bursts, probing the dark. Bullets chew through barkyards to his left. He veers right, ducking, zigzagging, lungs screaming. He doesn't know how far he runs. He only knows he doesn't stop, not until the forest goes quiet again, not until he reaches the top of the ridge and sees, in the faintest glow of distant gunfire, the dark valley stretching west, open, empty, a path toward friendly lines. He drops to his knees, chest heaving, and whispers into the snow, "Please, let me get through." Then he pushes himself up and descends into the valley below. Eddie scrambles down the far side of the ridge, half sliding, half stumbling as the valley swallows him in darkness. Here, the snow is deeper, soft, powdery drifts that reach his shins and cling to his boots with every step. The air seems colder too, sharper, like knives biting through his jacket. His breath comes in ragged clouds that vanishes fast, as they form. But it's quiet, blessedly, terrifyingly quiet. He pauses behind a cluster of fir trees, chest heaving, trying to control the wheeze of air leaving his lungs. Every noise feels like a flare. The rasp of fabric, the crunch beneath his boots, even the pulse in his ears. He listens. Nothing. Not even wind. The valley is a bowl of stillness. That makes him uneasy. He moves. The ground evens out into a wide open swath, a meadow now buried under a white, unbroken sheet of snow. His stomach tightens. Open ground is death. No trees, no brush, no cover. A man. Crossing this meadow is a silhouette, an easy mark for any German on the surrounding ridges. But the alternative is worse. Climbing back uphill into the jaws of the encirclement. Eddie checks the sky. Clouds still heavy, moon still smothered. Darkness will protect him for now. He crouches low, carbine slung, tight, and steps into the open. His boots sink silently. The snow muffles his footfalls. He moves quickly, head swiveling left and right. Each breath is a hoarse whisper. Halfway across, he stops. A prickle crawls up the back of his neck. He's being watched. He doesn't hear anything. Doesn't see movement. But instinct, some deep, animal part of him, screams danger. He sinks slowly into the snow, flattening his body until he's just another mound in the white expanse. His fingers dig into powder, trembling. Then he hears it. A faint metallic clack from the tree line to his right. Like, oh, bolt being eased forward on a rifle. Eddie's heart drops. He inches his hand toward the carbine. A German voice drifts across the valley. Soft, almost bored. Da drüben. Etwas. Bewegt sich. Over there. Something's moving. Eddie freezes. Another voice answers, older. Weary. Ein Reh. Vielleicht. A deer, maybe. 9. Zu groß. A long beat. Then the sound of boots crunching snow, coming closer. He inches backward, barely breathing. The snow against his chest feels like ice water soaking through to his ribs. His gloves are numb. His face stings from the cold. The boots keep coming. He judges the distance by sound. 50 yards, 40, 30. He's out of time. Slowly, painfully slowly, Eddie rolls onto his side and peers across the snow. He sees them, 2 dark shapes, rifles slung low, scanning the meadow. Their helmets catch a faint sliver of reflected light. Their breath rises in small puffs. They're hunting. Eddie's fingers curl around the carbine's grip. He doesn't want to shoot. Firing a weapon would light the whole valley like a beacon. He'll be dead before the echo fades. He glances left. A dip in the snow, barely visible. Just a shallow fold in. The ground. A drainage ditch, maybe. 10 yards away. 10 yards that might save him. He waits until the Germans pause and squint toward the far ridge. Then he moves. Fast. He lunges forward, diving belly first into the ditch. Snow erupts around him in a white spray. He clamps a hand over his mouth to muffle the grunt of pain as he slams into the Nothercinte, frozen ground. The Germans shout. Footsteps sprint toward where he was. Eddie buries himself deeper into the ditch, pressing flat against the earth. Snow fills the gap over his legs, over his back. He pulls his parka hood down, smearing snow across his helmet to hide its shine. Boots stop directly above him. He hears the Germans breathe. One taps his rifle on the snow, sweeping it aside. He kicks at the drift. Eddie dove through, searching. If the man takes one more step, he'll land right on him. Eddie squeezes his eyes shut. Seconds stretch into agonizing eternity. A shout cuts through the air, from farther up the valley. Zurück! Wir gehen zurück! Back! We're pulling back! The boots hesitate. 1 heartbeat, 2, then retreat, crunching away toward the call. Eddie keeps still, even after the footsteps fade. He waits until the voices vanish entirely, swallowed by the forest. Then he finally exhales. The breath shudders out of him, leaving him shaking uncontrollably. He doesn't know if it's the cold or the terror. Then he moves, slowly crawling up from the ditch, snow packed into every seam of his clothing. The western ridge is ahead now. Dark, dense, promising cover. He stumbles toward it. But as he reaches the first trees, the ground suddenly dips, and he nearly falls straight into a shallow trench. An American foxhole, half collapsed, abandoned. He stops. A cigarette butt. An empty BAR magazine. A torn scrap of 28th Division shoulder patch. This is far out from his regiment's last known position, meaning the front line has shifted. Or dissolved. He looks up at the forest beyond. If there are Americans here, they're scattered. If there are Germans, they're sleeping or waiting. Either way, this ridge is the last barrier before he hits the artillery zones where friendly fire might reach. He grips his carbine tighter, and he moves forward into the dark, toward the final stretch between survival and death. Eddie leaves the abandoned foxhole behind him, stepping into a forest that feels older, darker, heavier. The trees are taller here, thick pines that blot out what little moonlight seeps through the clouds. The snow thins beneath their branches, but the ground is colder, harder, the roots like ribs beneath the earth. He presses on. His legs burn. His lungs ache. The icy air tears at his throat. Every breath sounds too loud in the stillness. But the western ridge, his only hope, rises ahead of him like a black wall against the sky. He climbs. Each step is torture. His boots slip on patches of frozen moss. Branches claw at his jacket. And always, his ears strain for the sound of German voices behind him. Halfway up, he hears something else instead. American artillery. Distant. Faint. A rolling, rhythmic thud like distant thunder. He stops, chest heaving, eyes wide. He's close. Closer than he realized. A laugh sputters out of him, half sob, half disbelieving relief. But then the world erupts. A shell screams overhead, tearing the sky open in a shrill, descending howl. Eddie dives behind a tree as the round impacts somewhere farther down the valley, far too close. The blast smashes through the quiet, rattling branches, pelting him with chunks of ice and dirt. Snow plumes upward like geysers. American guns. They don't know he's here. He pushes himself up, stumbling forward as another round shrieks down. Even closer this time. The forest flashes white as an explosion splits the night. Trees snap. Snow cascades from branches like waterfalls. Eddie gasps, covering his head as debris rains down. He's entered the kill zone. The place American artillery is pounding to slow the German advance, to prevent breakthroughs, to weaken the forces encircling his regiment. And he's running straight through it. "God, help me!" he whispers, voice trembling. There's no other route. If he goes south, he'll hit German armor. North is a swamp of unbroken forest with mines laid by retreating units. West through the barrage is suicide, but it's the only way. He braces himself and runs. The first shell lands behind him, close enough that heat brushes his neck. He sprints blindly, weaving between trees. The ground bucks beneath his feet as explosions march through the woods, tearing chasms in the snow. He leaps over a fresh crater, lands hard, nearly collapses. A second shell detonates ahead of him. The flash blinds him, the shockwave, knocking him sideways into a drift. Snow swallows him whole, cold, crushing against his face. He claws his way out, gasping, eyes burning. Every instinct screams to turn back. But back is death. Forward is possibly death. He chooses forward. Branches whip his face. His helmet rattles. His legs feel like wet sand. But the thunder of the artillery grows louder, meaning the guns are closer, meaning safety lies somewhere past the next ridge. Then, through the smoke and snow and chaos, he spots it. A faint orange flicker through the trees. A muzzle flash. American. He freezes. Lifting his hands instinctively, then drops again as a burst of .30 caliber fire rips through the branches above him. The machine gun stutters in long, deliberate bursts, firing into the valley behind him. They're shooting at Germans. They don't know he's here. "Hey!" Eddie rasps, voice breaking. "American!" American! A round zips past his ear, snapping a branch beside him. He flinches, ducking low. Seize! Fire! He shouts again, louder, pushing through the last trees, stumbling toward the foxhole line ahead. A silhouette rises from behind a log. Don't move! A voice barks. Identify yourself. Eddie collapses to his knees, hands up, panting. Private Eddie Walker, 110 Infantry. Encircled. He coughs. Hard. Need. To reach. Division HQ. The silhouette lowers its rifle a fraction. Two more figures emerge from the shadows. Helmet, nets, American coats dusted with snow, rifles trained on him but wavering. Christ, one murmurs. He's a kid. I'm 27. Eddie snaps hoarsely, because dignity dies last. One of the men steps closer, gripping him under the arm and hauling him upright. Eddie sways, but stays standing. Where's the rest of your unit? The soldier asks. Eddie's voice cracks. Behind the German lines. Cut off. Surrounded. They think they can break out. But only if division knows. They need artillery shifted. They need a corridor. The soldiers exchange a glance. Then the first one nods, firmly. All right. Get him to the CP. Now. Eddie's legs nearly give out with relief. Warm hands drag him between the foxholes, past a row of shivering gunners loading belts into a .30 caliber. One gives Eddie a look, curiosity, pity, disbelief, but returns to scanning his sector almost immediately. They bring him into a small dugout reinforced with logs. A stove smolders in the corner, barely warming the air. A single lantern hangs from a nail, casting dim yellow light. A captain sits at a folding map table, headset pressed to one ear. He turns as Eddie stumbles in. What? We got here? A runner, sir, the soldier says, from the encircled regiment east of Hosingen. The captain's eyes sharpen behind wire-rimmed glasses. Is that true, Private? Eddie nods, breath trembling. They're trapped. Germans all around. They need the artillery line shifted north, and west or the breakout will fail. The captain stands so fast his chair skids. You sure of this? Eddie meets his gaze. Sir. They're depending on you. The captain turns instantly to the radio operator. Patch me to Division HQ. Priority. Eddie sinks onto a crate, barely feeling his body. Every bone aches. His hands shake uncontrollably. His face stings from cold and windburn. But he's alive, and he delivered the message. Behind him, the captain begins relaying coordinates, his voice urgent, clipped, decisive. Enemy concentration confirmed east of Hosingen. Suggest immediate. Fire correction to grid. Eddie exhales, a long, shuddering breath. Somewhere behind him, deep in that dark forest, men are waiting. Men who will live, who will survive, because a cook walked through hell to warn them. He closes his eyes. For the first time all night, he feels warm. Eddie sits, slumped on the crate, the faint warmth from the stove seeping slowly into his frozen bones. His vision swims in and out of focus. He's not sure how long he's been inside the CP. Minutes? Hours? His body wants to sleep, to collapse, to disappear into the dark warmth. But the Prussian voices around him keep him tethered to the moment. The captain leans over the field radio, barking coordinates with the urgent precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Shift fire to grid 12 to 43. Repeat, 12 to 43. Enemy armor massing on the ridge line. If we don't cut them off, they'll overrun the breakout. Route. Static flares, followed by a muffled acknowledgement. The captain motions to a logistics NCO. Wake the gun batteries. I want illumination shells ready. As soon as they move, we light up the entire valley. He turns back to Eddie. You said they planned to break out tonight, yes? Eddie nods weakly. Lieutenant Marks? He said before dawn. They were going to try for the gap, but the Germans were moving in on it. They needed artillery to punch another hole. The captain lets out a slow breath, jaw tightening. They'll have it. He kneels in front of Eddie, gripping his shoulder, not warmly, but firmly, as though anchoring him to the world. You did good, son. Eddie manages a faint smile. I'm a cook, sir. The captain's expression softens. Tonight, you're the reason 2,000 men might live to see daylight. The words hit Eddie harder than any burst of machine gun fire. He swallows, throat tight. Outside, voices rise, orders spreading through the cold pine shadows. Get the liaison jeep warmed up. Wire team. I want those lines reconnected. Wake the FO. He's got fire missions coming. Move! Move! Eddie hears everything through a fog of exhaustion. But one thought burns through it. They listened. Division knows. His regiment isn't alone anymore. Minutes later, maybe longer, he is bundled into a jeep under heavy blankets. The engine sputters, coughs, then roars to life. The driver, a corporal with frost-bitten cheeks, glances back and gives Eddie a nod. You're going to Division HQ, pal. They'll want details from the guy who came through that hell. Eddie only nods, teeth chattering. The jeep lurches forward, grinding over frozen ruts. Snow blows across the hood in thin, swirling sheets. Eddie grips the side of the sand seat as trees whip past on either side. Behind them, the first artillery salvo whistles overhead. Then, the night erupts. A line of explosions ripples across the distant ridge, exactly where Eddie had crept only hours earlier. The sky flashes orange, red, white. The ground shakes. The corporal whistles low. That, for your boys out there? Eddie nods. God! I hope so. The jeep races westward, away from the barrage. For the first time since stepping into the forest, Eddie feels something like safety. Division HQ sits inside a cluster of half-destroyed farm buildings, sandbagged and camouflaged with snow-covered netting. MPs wave the jeep through. Eddie stumbles out, blanket still around his shoulders, legs nearly giving out. A major meets him at the doorway. You Walker? He asks sharply. Yes, sir. You bring us the report? Eddie nods and hands him the crumpled, half-frozen map scrap from his jacket. The major studies it quickly, then gestures for Eddie to follow. Inside, the command post is a flurry of ordered chaos. Radio operators relaying fire missions, officers huddled over maps, clerks typing on portable machines. A pot of coffee boils on a small stove, filling the air with a smell Eddie hasn't noticed since leaving the regiment. The major waves him over to a large table. Show us exactly where the encirclement is tightening, he says. Eddie leans in, trembling, pointing to landmarks, blown-out ravines, creek bends, tree clusters, a ridge scarred by artillery. His finger traces the route he took, then stops where the gap had begun to close. There, he whispers. That's where I saw them moving in. Panthers, I think. Couldn't be sure in the dark. The officers exchange grim looks. Foe teams confirm armor movement, one says. He's right. Another places a hand on Eddie's shoulder. You got out just in time. Eddie swallows. Will they make it out? He asks softly. The major glances at the map, then at the radio operators calling in the new barrage pattern. We're giving them a fighting chance, he says. That's more than they had before you showed up. As dawn hints at the horizon, just a faint, icy shimmer, Division HQ falls silent. In the distance, through the trees, through the snow, through miles of frozen hell, machine guns chatter, artillery thunders, Flares bloom like dying stars. The chaos of a breakout attempt shatters the early morning calm. Eddie stands just outside the CP, wrapped in blankets, staring east. A runner jogs past, breath steaming. "Orders are out," he says. "All units west of the line are clearing a corridor. Your regiment's coming through." Eddie's heart lurches. "They're making it?" The runner grins despite the cold. "Sounds like it. Someone must have warned him before the Germans closed the trap." Eddie's breath catches. He watches the eastern horizon glow faintly with distant fire. "Good," he whispers. "Good." Hours later, word arrives. The 110th Infantry broke through with heavy casualties, but not annihilation. They lived because of a cook.